Hello everyone and welcome to Celebrating Cinema, a podcast striving to rebuild our beloved community, creating a more inclusive and shared experience. I'm joined as always by
Tom, the programmer of Lab 111.
and
Hugo, film critic.
And today we aren't joined by Kiriko, but instead we're joined by writer and director Kim Kokosky Deforchaux, who's here to celebrate cinema with us, and his choice of subject is Second World War movies. So Kim, the floor is yours.
For as long as I know, I've always been fascinated with the Second World War. It is, for a lack of a better word, my favorite war. And I can't see how this could have been any different. Growing up, the war seemed to have been everywhere. It was something the whole world had to live through at the time. My vastly different grandparents had experienced this global event when they were still young. My mother's parents lived in the south of the Netherlands and had endured the occupation of Nazi Germany, while on the other side of the world, in the Dutch East Indies, my father's parents had suffered under the occupation of the Japanese Imperial Army. Their combined experiences had influenced the childhoods of my parents and to a lesser extent seeped into my childhood experience as well. Growing up, basically everybody's grandparents had lived through the war. When we vacationed in France, we visited cemeteries filled with dead soldiers and a monumental town whose inhabitants had been locked inside a burning church. The town had been left intact to convey the horrors that must have taken place back then. Seeing the bullet-riddled car of the town doctor used to haunt me, as my great-grandfather had also been a small-town doctor during the war. Remnants of the era were specifically obvious in the city I grew up in, Amsterdam. Tiny brass tiles are found everywhere, bearing the names of Jewish people who became victims of the Nazis. As a kid, I browsed through as many history books as I could lay my hands on, usually just taking in the black and white photos. At night, I would lay in my bed and I would wonder if I would have been prosecuted for how I looked. I wondered if I could have found a good place to hide, and where that would be. Who of the people I knew would be willing to help me if I had to hide? I wondered how much it would hurt to lose loved ones, or if I would have been brave enough to commit acts of resistance. The most effective way to get through to me as a kid was to show me a movie. Through this medium, World War II obviously didn't escape me. Quite the contrary. Perhaps more than all the other wars combined, the Second World War has been widely and extensively portrayed in film. And so my fascination with the war has seemingly always been intertwined with my love for movies. To my first cinematic hero, Steven Spielberg, the war had been just as essential. His father served in the Air Force during the war, and his mother's family had been ravished by the Holocaust. His first amateur short films in Arizona were war films. He would put helmets on local boys that looked like grown-ups to him, and he made them run around while he employed all kinds of cheap tricks to make it look like they were in battle. And just as the Second World War remained a thread throughout Spielberg's work, the war remained a thread throughout my life and my love for film. Our humble Dutch film industry always had a close affinity with the war too. A glance at a list of the few classic Dutch films shows a significant number of war films. But apart from the classics, this Dutch tradition of churning out war films on an almost annual basis, in my opinion, rarely results in something cinematically interesting. Dutch war films basically always come with a mold that forces these usually large productions to be extremely repetitive, both thematically and stylistically. When I started studying to become a screenwriter at the Netherlands Film Academy, I gradually developed my own World War II set feature film script, hoping that it would someday add something new to the national cinematic landscape. This set off my deep dive into World War II cinema from around the world, to see how people combined their love of cinema with the shared memory of the war, how they used their movies to challenge themselves artistically about the trauma and the uncomfortable truths the war left them to deal with.
Thank you, Kim. We invited you for this podcast because it's the month of May, in which the 4th and 5th of May we tend to think about the Second World War a lot. And you wrote a thesis about this for the Dutch Film Academy, which this Cold Open was a part of, I believe. Can you maybe tell us a bit more about that thesis, what you were looking for and what you found?
I started writing my thesis just because I made like a top 30 of my favorite Westerns a year before. And then the year after, I watched so many World War II movies because I was writing my own screenplay at the time, just to research it. Basically asked the teachers if I could just make like a top 50, because I was really into making lists. I still am.
That's what you and Tom
Yeah.
have in common.
Yeah.
Compulsorily making lists.
I was just really into making lists, and made
This
like
is
a
why
top
you're
50.
invited to the podcast. by the way.
The list is live.
Yeah, exactly.
Just wanted to rank the films, and it's kind of a mishmash. It's partly like personal preference. Most of the list was decided by this idea that I really wanted to see films that were challenging to me. Like the characters were challenged, really challenged. Not just like, oh, are you brave enough or do you
Right.
have what it takes? Like, because most war films, in my experience, they presented war like, oh, you'll be traumatized, but the rest of the country will think you're a hero for the rest of your life. I was really looking for
Critique.
Yeah, critique, but yeah,
Complexity, maybe.
complexity.
Because
yeah.
you were saying in your cold open that, many of the Dutch Second World War films that have been made maybe in the past years or so have often, I can deeply relate that the films that I've seen from the past years that explore this subject often do it in this kind of one note
yeah,
manner, which is mostly, it's kind of like, a paper cut, kind of like nationalist kind of
Yeah.
agenda where everything is about sacrifice, heroism, being in a position of being a victim.
Yeah.
And then despite these awful circumstances, rising to the occasion and then prevailing something that's pure.
It's true. Yeah.
And that's obviously, I can understand the sentiment, but I'm wondering, like, what your idea about that is. What happens when films stray away from that, right? What happens when there's nuance and there's complexity and it's not only you're either good or bad and this whole binary thinking gets, complicated.
Well, I did steer away a little bit like soldier stories because they usually have to be brave or they usually have to like endure. I really gravitated towards movies about like real people who just try to live their life with the war in the background and eventually coming to the foreground. I just basically looked at a movie really tried to study the complexity and the duality of war and situations like really difficult for their main characters. Like it really tries to understand how people can do horrible things. If you look at my list in my thesis, that most main characters ended up on the wrong side of history.
What I found looking at the list was that these are very much films that try to show war not so much as black and white or
Yeah.
bad versus evil, but very,
Bad versus
very
evil, good versus
Oh,
evil.
sorry.
It's bad versus evil.
Good versus evil.
There's only two
Yeah, there you
positions in
go.
war.
Sounds a
Oh,
true
man, it's-
pessimist.
yeah,
Like,
true
there's
pessimist.
only two people in this world.
Bad people
Bad evil.
and worse people. Yeah. Now, it's very much about the gray stuff, right? It's people getting caught up in, as you said, like sometimes with most of these films, the war seems to be around them,
Yeah.
but not necessarily they are driven by it, but it sort of seeps into their lives
Yeah.
and changes their lives drastically, but not in such an extent where they are suddenly a knight in shining armor or Hitler himself.
Tom, we're talking about the list. I think, Kim, you have to do one thing. Maybe talk about some of the films that are on the top of your list. And I think you also have to explain where the film that we were watching for this
Oh, yeah,
episode,
yeah.
Le Dernier Métro by François Truffaut, where that ranks on your list and why you've chosen it, today for us to watch.
It's not on my list.
It's the outlier.
I think I did mention it in the thesis. Actually, it has a very trivial reason for being the movie of choice for today. It was just because it was available on Mubi.
Look, that's our
a great
also,
service.
Your taste
Yes.
is just too obscure.
Yeah, no. No, but like The Last Metro was definitely the type of movie that I really wanted to research while I was doing all this research.
Écoutez-moi bien, vous. On est embarqués sur le même bateau. On continue de jouer cette pièce ensemble. Mais en dehors de ça, je vous demande de ne plus jamais m'adresser la parole.
Was because it's definitely a film about regular people trying to live through these times and slowly see the lives they like to live becoming more and more impossible.
Why didn't you like it?
It's not that I didn't like it. It's just I was going through this phase where I was watching so many World War II films, and a lot of them were just really blowing me away. And this one, it's actually a solid film. I think it won a lot of César.
110 Césars.
It's the highest grossing François Truffaut film out there.
I hadn't seen it. I believe Hugo hadn't seen it as
No.
well, and Elliot hadn't seen it as well. Well, we're such Truffaut noobs.
True cinephiles over here.
Yeah, we have to invite guests from now on who haven't seen as much films as Kim. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I do agree with you that it's a solid film, but it's not a masterpiece. But what I found very interesting was indeed that fact that we were just discussing is that if you take the war out of this film, it's still a very interesting film about a troop of people. but
Yeah.
the war changes the entire setting and the entire motive.
I think I like the film more than both of you do. And I also,
be.
for our listeners that haven't seen it yet, maybe try to explain what it's about. So the film is called Le Dernier Métro, The Last Metro. It's like a 1980s made François Truffaut film starring Catherine Deneuve. Well, it's set in Paris during the occupation of the Nazis during the Second World War. And you describe the people that the film focuses on as being ordinary, but I think the interesting thing about the film is that they are maybe in many cases anything but ordinary, in the sense
I mean, like more ordinary, like they're not necessarily
they're not
involved
part
with
of
the war.
the machine of war.
Yeah, that's what I was trying
exactly.
to say, yeah.
But the funny thing about the film, of course, is that they are extraordinary in the sense that they have this, improvised family going on, because they're
Yeah.
all part of this Montmartre-based theater company that is, trying to get by in this very intense political climate, still trying to put on shows, while the theater director, who is a Jewish man, is gone hiding. And we find out in the film that he actually didn't flee the country yet, but he is still stuck in the basements of the actual theater. And he, in a shadow style, doctored and authored the play that is, being performed at that moment. And he secretly listens to the play while it's being performed via the shafts in the wall or the pipes that are running down, so he can still write down the notes and give his feedback and stuff.
That's actually beautiful the way you describe it. Look, it sounds really beautiful.
It is, and that's the thing for me about this film, is that it is very beautiful, and that the funny thing, and I guess that's maybe also why you chose it for today, besides for its availability, is maybe that in a sense the war is very present in the way that it shapes their lives and their work and kind of endangers what they want to do most in life. But at the same time, it's only just this textural, ambient reality that goes on outside of the doors of this theater. But inside, there's a different world with different rules, with different kind of, challenges and things that they're dealing with internally. It made me think, and Tom and I were also discussing this today, that it kind of really makes sense in our current reality. And I don't want to compare living under a pandemic as living under occupation. It's not truly the same, but the idea that your daily reality goes on and that much of the global tragedy is, for most people that are not at the front line, is just this textural outside that you can kind of see but not really every day engage with or something. I thought that was very beautiful.
I think it's really beautiful as well. But I think at the time when I watched The Last Metro for the first time, I was just looking for more twisted characters, and you don't really get twisted characters. You just see how the times were twisted.
You got Gérard Depardieu cocking Heinz Burnett, so that's already a pretty good thing.
but
you got your French perverse sexuality thing going on in the film. I kind of like that.
Yeah, the way you describe it right now,
You're selling the movie
in hindsight,
to Kim
you're
now.
really selling the movie to me. Personally, I was just really looking for really twisted characters and a type of style. I really wanted main characters to end up on the wrong side. I was really looking for that kind of sentiment, and I think The Last Metro just kind of breezed through this wave of great films that I saw.
It's so funny because to go back to that, that external reality or that ambient aspect of the Second World War and the Nazi occupation, I feel like Truffaut is kind of hinting at the fact that this could also be an occupation thriller, because sometimes you have these shots that take place inside the theater, but then in the background, a door is open, right, and you see somebody ominously standing on the streets looking in at what's going on over there, and you don't know who these people are. Are they kind of Gestapo-ish people? And then the music gets super intense. Where you're oof, danger is lurking around the corner. Everything is at stake suddenly. And then it just kind of also siphons away. It's kind of it becomes this magical theater film again that could also easily be in the Wes Anderson playbook. And then suddenly the creepy music comes back again. And it's oh shit, so it's becoming a thriller again. I guess that's how the day-to-day reality was maybe then or something.
On that note, I would say it's my favorite oboe and clarinet infused Georges Delerue soundtrack.
In the same vein of artists who really see their their jobs being endangered just by the reality of this occupation. I also saw a film that actually left me a little bit cold the same way Last Metro did. It was like Mephisto.
Oh yeah.
Heard of it?
Yeah,
Maybe?
yes.
Like, yeah, but it was also about like either an opera singer or a theater actor, and he actually drifts into madness a little bit more. So it was a little bit closer to what I was looking for at the time. But The Last Metro, just wish I appreciated as much as you did.
I was wondering, have you ever seen this Ernst Lubitsch film from 1942 called
To Be or Not to Be? Yeah, definitely.
Because I had like crazy To Be or Not to Be vibes from The Last Metro.
To Be or Not to Be is a swift-moving comedy melodrama, enriched by the magic that sparkles in every Ernst Lubitsch production. It's the picture everyone will want to see.
To Be or Not to Be is infinitely more funny, but it's also Ernst Lubitsch, who was a German director that fled. He was making a lot of films in the 1910s and 20s in Germany, and then he fled to the United States, and then he became this big guy in the US studio system. And he made a film about also a theater troupe in Poland in the 1940s being occupied by Nazi Germany, and it's like a hilarious comedy of errors, which is at the same time just the most hilarious meta take on how cheesy it is to perform Shakespeare. And then at the same time, it's people infiltrating the Gestapo by pretending to be Gestapo because they were working on a play about it. And it's all of these kind of like sly, silly jokes stacked on top of each other. It's a wildly controversial film as well.
I actually mentioned it in my thesis, but I didn't include it eventually. I left it out of the top 50 just because I did want to include films that were made during the war. Because most of these films, like, for example, like The Great Dictator was made during the war.
Yeah, exactly. That's like 1941 or...
Exactly,
yeah.
and Charlie Chaplin, he explained it best, actually. He said, I would have never made that film if I had known how the Holocaust actually turned out. He knew Jews were being discriminated and prosecuted to a certain extent, but he didn't know they were being, like, butchered, like, industrially.
Those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish.
It's the same with Lubitsch. From the outside looking in, from the States looking in into Europe, you don't really know what's happening. And there's a joke in To Be or Not to Be that you have this German character. He's like a Commandant Erhard or something, but the joke is that he's always referred to as concentration camp Erhard because he makes the joke, well, we do the concentration and they do the camping. And they made this in 1942 while not being aware of the severity of what a concentration camp was becoming or what it meant.
The reality bounce satire out of place.
But that's an interesting thing, which I was thinking about related to Jojo Rabbit, which is probably one of the biggest crimes of the 21st century. But that's an overstatement, but it's still a shitty film. Because it's like that film, also make a comic take on this absolutely fills in doing so.
Who's Hitler? Do you even speak German?
Heil Hitler.
That's not a Heil. This is a Heil. Heil.
Heil Hitler.
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 Ooh, that's it. You got it. Heil Hitler. Have a great day. Heil Hitler. You're going to be the best. Heil Hitler. You can do it. Heil Hitler. Heil Hitler.
And I'd rather have like a million of those Charlie Chaplin produced films during the Second World War that actually managed to point to something that is true and poignant than the liberal fantasy crap that Tiger Waititi is doing.
I haven't seen it. I wish I could comment on Jojo Rabbit.
Wish you could hate it as much as I do.
So Kim, maybe we take a look at your list now and see what twisted characters made it on.
I have my list right here. One that left like a really deep impression on me was Lacombe Lucien, which is a Louis Malle movie.
Après Le Souffle au cœur, le nouveau film de Louis Malle, Lacombe Lucien.
Because that main character just really frightened me. It was maybe one of the scariest main characters I've ever seen, because he's like a really simple guy. It's like a simple boy who just hunts ducks or something. Like he just walks around like Normandy. I think he lives somewhere in France in the middle of nowhere, and he starts to occupy France. He at first he wants to join the resistance, but they don't really trust him because he's too childish, and his brain is just too simple. They don't trust him enough. And then he just immediately turns around and goes to the fascist recruitment center and they give him a gun and a uniform and they send him back into society, where he just basically just starts to terrorize everyone that gets in his way. He's so gullible and so easily influenced. And it just really scared me. It was exactly the type of movie I was looking for.
Any others?
Any others?
I saw Una Giornata Particolare on there as well, which I really, really loved. I think because I saw it at a very young age, so
yeah, me too.
It stuck with me forever. This story about, maybe you can explain what it's about better than I can.
It actually doesn't take place during the Second World War, but I did put it on the list because it's really about just normal people under these larger historic circumstances. It takes place in Rome during the 1930s, I think, when Hitler first visited Rome and visited Mussolini, of course. So everybody in Rome just leaves their house and goes to the main road where they can see the Führer and Mussolini. And there's this apartment building. There's only two people who don't go to see the parade. And it's his mom. She has like the fascistic dream family. Like her husband is like a very aggressive fascist who had like 5 babies with her. She's like the fascistic dream of a housewife. She stays home because she doesn't care much. She wants to take some rest. The housewife is played by Sofia Loren. And there's the other guy, it's Marcello Mastroianni. I think he's a radio DJ, or he used to work at radio, and he's a homosexual who's also anti-fascist. So he's on the verge of just losing his job if he hasn't lost his job already. He still kind of planning his escape from Italy. These two, by circumstance, they just bump into each other. They are neighbors who never really knew each other, and they just have one day together. They find some common ground in just both being lonely for very different reasons, but at the same time, this loneliness is also caused by the fascist reality they're living in. So yeah, it's a very, very, it's a masterpiece.
Yeah,
if you
it
ask
is. It's Torrescola, right?
Yeah,
If I'm correct.
yeah.
Yeah. The best thing about that movie, we've discussed this here before now, is that you don't see any part of the parade actually. You just hear it, right?
They use some footage.
Oh, there is footage. Oh, it goes to show that it feels so.
Yeah,
It's in the air.
They're most of it
more it's
on
in
the
air.
radio.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The war sort of surrounds them, or the terror surrounds them more than it.
It's passing them by. They're staying home.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find that very beautiful. I think that's.
They didn't go see it. There was like a
No,
historic
exactly,
parade
yeah.
going through the city,
Yeah.
and these are the two that didn't go see it.
Yeah, it's not Indiana Jones getting an autograph from Hitler himself. Yeah.
Nazis. I hate these guys.
What's the film that tops the list for you? What's like the people who are interested in exploring this subject in a deep level? What would you really dish people out?
Difficult because the movie that tops the list is The Human Condition.
巨匠小林正樹監督が軍隊の崩壊と荒野にさまよう人間の運命を通じ高らかに戦争否定のテーマを歌う人間の条件
But it's a tough movie to sell because it takes 9 hours and 45 minutes. It's like a really long film. It's usually billed as a trilogy, but it is actually like just a very long film in 6 chapters.
How would you pitch it to people if they would see it?
It's just one of the realest cinematic experience you could have. Like I watched it in 3 nights. Just watched it for like 3 hours and 15 minutes every night. And after I finished the last part, I was just lying on the couch for like 2 hours with my mouth open, just staring at the ceiling. Yeah, I couldn't really understand what I just saw. It just it made a really, really big impression on me.
I had a similar experience with Berlin Alexanderplatz, which has the same kind of vibe where fascism creeps up, but it's also set in the 30s in the Weimar Republic before Hitler totally takes over, and like fascism is obviously there and it plays a part in the moral landscape, but it's not that present yet. But that's also,
In The Human Condition, he's right there. Like the main character, he's a pacifist. First, he hopes he's going to be in the background. He tries to stay out of the army. He gets this job in Manchuria. He starts to work there in an office, but an office that aids the Japanese army, but he just doesn't want to fight. And then, of course, during this 9-hour, 45-minute runtime, he's going to go through some very drastic changes whilst trying to maintain his beliefs.
I like that you're, mentioning the pacifist aspect of this character, because that's the thing that I was thinking about, mentally preparing for today, that there's also this strange, almost kind of like double bind or dilemma when, dealing with war movies, especially, many filmmakers are probably in a sense pacifist, right? But when you really want to show some of the more visceral aspects of war, you get into this paradox of, when you show it in its truly terrifying and visceral form, are you, critiquing it, or are you in a way perpetuating what has already been happening in the past, and kind of like recapturing also the thrill of war in a sense? And this is also coming back to Poe, something that he said, right?
Anti-war films don't exist, right?
Exactly.
That's what he said.
For instance, Francis Ford Coppola was in later also asked about this, and he also kind of like admitted, well, maybe, with Apocalypse Now, I didn't really succeed in what I set out to do, which is to make that anti-war film.
Yeah.
And in hindsight, he realized that maybe Truffaut was right all along, that maybe in many senses, Apocalypse Now can also be seen as a great text of why war for some kind of people can be great. For instance, you have a film like Thin Red Line from Terrence Malick, which I think is one of the most mainstream pacifist war movies that you can have out there. But even there, war comes awfully close to being also beautiful in a sense.
This great evil, where's it come from?
I think it's just because the main characters are going through like real life experiences. I think when you look at The Thin Red Line, even though war looks awful, I remember seeing that film when I was like 11 or 10. It was right after I saw Saving Private Ryan. It came out the same year.
Some private in the 101st lost 3 of his brothers and he's got a ticket home.
It's not going to be easy finding one particular soldier in the whole damn war.
I hadn't seen anything like it. I was younger, of course. Even though Saving Private Ryan already showed me as a kid that war isn't...
What is it good for?
Yeah, what is it good for, exactly. And Thin Red Line went even further. Like when I saw it, I really remember how far from home every main character seemed. Like they were very, very... Yeah,
They're existentially lost.
Yeah, they looked very lost. And I also remember when I saw Thin Red Line, it was the first time I saw the Japanese, actually, because I grew up with a more European... Europe-centric idea of the Second World War, and I knew of the Japanese, of course, because of my grandparents, but I only knew the stories, so I never saw it portrayed in film before I saw The Thin Red Line, and later, of course, I saw other films about that side of the world. When I saw The Thin Red Line, like the first time you see the Japanese soldiers, it takes like an hour, an hour and a half. Like the American soldiers, the main characters are all like really nervous to see him. They say like, oh, once you see those samurai swords, you're gonna run away, and then they find like cut up bodies, and then when they finally see the Japanese soldiers for the first time, and at first, of course, the Japanese soldiers are just like hills that are very difficult to conquer, and then when they finally open up these manholes with all these Japanese soldiers hiding in them, they're just scantily dressed, all like starved and delirious. As a kid, I just couldn't imagine like these guys. I was scared so much. My grandparents told me such scary stories about these Japanese soldiers, and I saw them in The Thin Red Line, and I saw how like they were also kind of like victims of these circumstances. It really left a deep impression on me.
A couple of ways that we can progress. I think one of them is more of those kind of films that are truly pacifist, but still deliver some of the thrills of what war can be. And I think Come and See Edie's Matri from Elem Klimov might be a good reference point. But from the...
It's the second on my list.
Look, there you have it. Yeah, but I'm also thinking now, obviously, about The Flags of Our Fathers and Letters from Iwo Jima, right?
There it is. There is Clint Eastwood. Clint Eastwood has entered the podcast again.
Suddenly, this is a Clint Eastwood podcast. He is the quintessential American man. Clint Eastwood has entered the chat, but like enough, I remember that's one of the first films that I saw from that, Japanese point of view as well.
Yeah.
And I think there's many things to be said about the film and some of its cons as well. But I do think that it was kind of amiable of Eastwood to try to, make it a both side story rather than only, othering the other being the Japanese and making them this kind of like, as they are in The Flags of Our Fathers, this mostly kind of like, a guerrilla type force that you don't really, see in face to face. Those films I think they're interesting in that they mostly reflect on the construct of war, of its narrative construct. Like, you need to have a clear narrative for war to function and to be profitable and to reap in money. At least that's the Flag of Our Father's side. And then I'm not sure how truly authentic or what well-spirited from Iwo Jima is in terms of how it captures the Japanese experience. Yeah. But at least he tries to go there, which I think is already something, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I've actually been quite puzzled with how the Japanese perceive like the Second World War. Because at first, when I started this research, I was really, really pleasantly surprised of how daring all these Japanese films were. They basically addressed every wrongdoing the Japanese were accused of. Fires on the Plain addresses the cannibalism.
Yeah,
you need some balls to face a national history. So my impression was that they were very far in accepting these dark pages. That's actually how I wrote it down in my thesis. I was like, oh, the Japanese, the Netherlands, we should take note.
Yeah, just imagine that we make a animated film like Grave of the Fireflies.
And they were also really impartial. Same with Grave of the Fireflies and Barefoot Gen. They describe war as some sort of natural force, like a natural punishment. And it's not anti-American or anything. Later on, I actually noticed that the Japanese don't teach World War II that much in school. A lot of Japanese people I met, they told me that if they know the truth about World War II, they usually had to look it up themselves. Or they learned from Dutch people. When they visit the Netherlands, then sometimes they run into really elderly Dutch people who were in the Dutch East Indies at the time, who will gladly tell them what happened.
Bits too gladly, maybe sometimes.
At that time, the Japanese people, they feel really obligated to
hear them out.
To hear them out, yeah, exactly. So it took some time for me to find out that a lot of Japanese films are perceived so much differently in Japan as well. A film like Fires on the Plain really impressed me, but apparently people in Japan don't really care for it. A director like Akira Kurosawa, when I speak to Japanese people, they're always like, oh, you probably like Akira Kurosawa. Yeah, foreign people tend to like him. We in Japan, we don't really care. So they have a very different perception.
Isn't that like the great tradition of every country to kind of shit on the people
they
like most famous from that thing? Like,
no, it's
how many people are.
It's not a fashion statement. They really think like, no, his movies are just too Western. He doesn't really capture the Japanese experience, and his apparently the acting in his films is too dramatic for their taste. They really see a lot of Hollywood influence that makes his films less authentic to them.
That's funny because that is a great link to Soviet cinema, because many people in Russia also have the same ideas about, for instance, now, which he didn't really make war films, but like Andrei Zvyagintsov, who's like, I mean, the apparent heir of Tarkovsky maybe in Russia. Many, Russian critics and cinephiles don't really care for his films because they think his films, nowadays at least, are too catered to a Western audience rather than their own audience, which, could bring us a little bit to come and see, because in a way it's also, if you don't want to put in 9 hours,
and
rather maybe 2, maybe that's then the ultimate film that you could watch to kind of have a big sense of what you can do with a war film, right?
Yeah, it's like come and see. I don't think there's any film that comes as close to actually traumatizing you the way I think war could traumatize you. Like it's after I saw that film, I felt the same way the kid did.
Yeah, it is one of the most visceral experiences ever in cinema.
I think you can actually like recognize people walking down the street if they saw it or not. We both saw the same thing.
It's very easily described by the small trivia of that the actor who plays the boy in it is, I don't know how, I can't remember how old he is.
I don't know.
But he literally
around
turned
12.
Yeah, around 12. But he literally turned gray while filming that film.
Yeah. But that's a makeup thing, right?
No. He in real life turned
his skin
gray.
got all wrinkly,
His
as
skin.
well.
They made him up to look older at the end of the film when he shoots that picture of Hitler. It is one of my favorite films of all time, and it has, for me, the most harrowing moment in a World War II film that I've ever seen, and it's when he's with that girl in the beginning of the movie, and he comes back to see where his parents are. But he can't find them. Like the entire village is suddenly.
You can hear the flies.
Yeah, you can hear the flies. They can't find anybody, and they're wondering where are they. And then they leave the village and they run on a road. And the camera, you have just a whip pan, and you see the back of the house, and all the bodies of the entire village are stacked up in such a methodical, effective, horrible way. Though somebody had just committed genocide, but did it in
an orderly fashion.
In such an orderly fashion.
Yeah.
And she doesn't tell him.
Yeah.
But you see it as an audience. And after that, you get the entire swamp scene, which is also... Oh, man, I can feel it now in my muscles of them going through that swamp trying to get away. And at the same time, the movie is so incredibly poetic. It has that very Russian poetic sheen going for it. That's the thing that we also discussed before, is that so war is very much part of this film. It's there. You see, as you mentioned in your cold open, a church of Jews just being burned while...
No, not Jews, just French villages.
Oh, French villages,
Yeah.
exactly.
And in this film, it's just, also...
just like Ukrainians, right? It takes place in...
it's Belarusian.
They throw them in a, what is it, like a shack or something?
Stable.
It's like a stable, and they just flamethrow it. Yeah. While you have that SS captain outside with that weird monkey on his shoulder.
No, he's got like a little lemur.
Lemur, it's a lemur, yeah. It goes through these very sort of traumatic experiences, but at the same time, war also sometimes disappears from the film, and it's him just being in the countryside. That's the thing also that Hugo and I discussed before we start this podcast, that the best movies, I think, also show you that different sort of feel of time during oppression, like during trauma, is that it's there, the trauma, the terror is there, but it can also just sometimes drift to the background, and then it's still going on, it's still there, but then life sort of just keeps on going.
I think there's, like with Elem Klimov, in many ways, a reckoning many things. Klimov, when he was young, he was also witness of like the Nazis invading Russia. And he and his mother had to flee the town where he was born, and he was like 10 or something, and he saw like a burning river, and they escaped via the river and saw their whole place that they lived in, go up in flames, which obviously made a big impact. And the crazy thing about, Soviet cinema is, if there's one country maybe that made a lot of Second World War movies, it's Russia, or former Soviet Russia. Also, the 9th of May, they celebrate Victory Day, right? It's the day in which also the Soviet Union has won against the Nazi forces. If there's one film that could easily be financed in the kind of intense bureaucratic system of the Soviet film industry, it was the Second World War film, which is the Great Patriotic War in Russia.
Yeah.
Many of those films also focus on children because they have a pedagogical element, that they are the future of the country, they are a new generation, and we need to instill this wisdom and experience in them.
I found that a lot of Russian films about the Second World War, and of course saw that Russian films are dependent on who was in charge. Like sometimes there was a thaw, 5 to 10 years of like very interesting
an Ivan's
films.
Childhood, you would have like a Winds, you would have like an Ascent.
I saw this one film that is unfortunately very hard to find. It's called Trial on the Road. I think it was released in like the late 80s, but it was made in 1971. It's a great film, but it was just too ambiguous. I think it's about Russian partisans like fighting in the snows. It really looks the same like The Ascent. Like it's very snowy, very white.
The Ascent is by Larisa Shepitko, who was the partner of Elem Klimov.
Yeah, exactly. Trial on the Road. It's about this officer just surrenders. Like he's a Russian, but he surrenders to the Soviet partisans whilst wearing in Nazi uniform. Tells him, like, I used to fight with the Red Army, then I changed my mind, then I joined the Nazis, and I changed my mind again, now I want to fight with you. And they are like, well, usually we shoot people like you, but in this case, you look like you mean business. Come join us. But then during this whole time when he's with them, nobody knows exactly where his loyalty is.
It's like the quintessential Kim Second World War film where everybody is shady as fuck.
But it was really, really good. There should be more recognition for this film. But it took like more than 15, 16 years for the Soviet government to release this film.
You know, that's very funny because that brings back to Ilham Klimov. Idi Smatri Come and See was his final film. He made it in 1985. It was kind of also his own reckoning film industry. You know, he was very jaded. His wife, Larissa Shepitko, passed away years earlier while location scouting for a film called The Farewell, which Klimov eventually finished in her place, which is a great film. Very different though. But so this was his kind of like last picture. And then he was appointed by the Soviet culture to be the first person to kind of dive into the history of Soviet film and re-release all of these shelved films that were put on the shelves by the Soviet state officials from the, 40s onwards or something. So I am gonna presume that a film like Trials on the Road has been released by the hands of Ilham Klimov, who then later gave that task up over to this very prominent Russian film critic. But that was kind of like his final role in the Russian film industry, was to go back to those films that were deemed, either too unpatriotic or controversial or too complicated, too messy.
Yeah.
And then, give them a second life and find a way for them to get re-released or at least get seen by some people at least.
The Ascent was shown to like Dutch censors, or
one person in the audience
cried,
he was a partisan himself from Belarusia, and that the film is also, the script is written by one of the biggest Belarusian authors, Vasil Bykov. Yeah, so one guy in the censor board was a partisan, saw himself reflected on the screen, cried, and made a case for this film to be released. It's maybe also a good note to end because we've been given a lot of films, I guess. But The Ascent is going to, at least in the Netherlands, get a release. Criterion has an edition of it for worldwide audiences, but in the Netherlands, it's going to get a cinema release. And another film that we didn't really talk about, but is also from the Soviet industry and also reflects on the Second World War, is The Cranes Are Flying, which is also getting released whenever cinemas in the Netherlands open. So there's some great films about this subject coming back, at least to the big screen.
Also, The Cranes Are Flying is also on my list.
Where is it? In what position?
Ooh, I'm afraid to tell you. No, it's a solid 30th.
Maybe I'll interject here, and if we try and make sense of all of this, what do you guys think cinema's role is in processing trauma and history, and specifically the Second World War? And perhaps, Kim, you can talk about how it then influences your own work.
It's difficult because I found that countries that tended to be less interesting when it came to the movies. Like, they have nothing to really criticize. So, but at the same time, that's also legit. Like, I can totally understand why, if you're American, the Second World War is a positive affair. America was kind of awesome during the Second World War, if you're American. But at the same time, I cannot really be mad at Americans having to wait until the Vietnam War to become disillusioned with war itself. But at the same time, I really admired it when I saw that countries try to really confront their traumas and really put the blame on themselves. Like, I saw this Hungarian film, was The Fifth Seal. It's basically just about people not reaching out to each other. Like, most of the movie takes place in like a speakeasy, or it's just like a bar after hours. 5 friends, one of them runs the bar, and they're just sitting there playing cards, having drinks, and they're just like planning on just drinking, waiting till the war is over. They're not trying to bother anybody. They definitely don't agree with fascists. They just don't want to cause any trouble. They just don't want any trouble. And then eventually they get picked up by not exactly by the Nazis, but Hungary had its own fascist National Socialist regime at the time. They're picked up by this regime. And they basically, I don't want to spoil anything, but they get punished for being passive. It wasn't really necessary, actually, but I really thought it was like ballsy for this director to crucify himself or like Hungarians in general. Yeah, for doing nothing.
In your thesis, you talk about, because it was part of your research for your first feature film screenplay, right?
Mhm.
It's called Unfatsoenlijke man. Can we
Unfatsoenlijk
translate
man, yeah.
like a decent man?
Yeah, somewhat decent man. or
somewhat
so.
decent man,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. A decent man.
Can you maybe tell us what that's about and how this influenced your screenplay?
For this screenplay was planned. I don't want to spoil too much because I actually really hope I'm going to make this someday.
So do we.
The seed was planted when I heard the story of Louis van Gasteren. Louis van Gasteren was a Dutch documentary filmmaker. He was a young man during the Second World War, and he was an electrician at the time. He did what I think most people wouldn't dare to do. He was hiding Jews from the Nazis while living in Amsterdam. He ended up killing a Jewish man during the Second World War. And he actually got prosecuted and convicted by the Nazis because he was found out like really quickly. After he killed him, he put him in a bag or like a suitcase, threw him in the water, and then he forgot that he left like his business card in the suitcase. So, like the Nazis really found out really quickly where this guy was hiding, and they convicted him and they put him in jail. And when the Nazis surrendered, he was released, and he just kind of got away with this. And he just lived his life, and he became like a famous documentary filmmaker in the Netherlands. And he always maintained that he had no choice, that it was like an accident, or the Jewish guy was threatening him, and it was kind of unclear. And Rudolf van den Berg, this Dutch filmmaker, he was good friends with Louis van Gasteren, and he made a documentary. Louis van Gasteren was like really old already. He made this documentary where he really tried to confront him with this history. Yeah. And he was still so defensive. He was like, "No, I thought you were my friend." Like he didn't want to have anything to do with this part of his life story. But when I heard this story, I thought, this is so interesting. Like this is it's so twisted. This guy,
such a bizarre paradox.
Exactly. He was brave enough to hide Jews. I don't know what happened, but then of course I start to fantasize of what could have happened. And my favorite Dutch book is De Donkere Kamer van Damocles. Yeah. Of course, is also my favorite World War II novel.
And a movie adaptation is the only Dutch film in your list.
That's true, yeah. To this day, one of the few Dutch films nominated for a Golden Palm as well.
Yeah.
I just kind of started combining these like elements of these two stories. It became something else because I've also had to take into account like practically realize this, of course. So I changed like the whole environment of I moved it out of the city, a bit more realistic to ever realize this project.
Perhaps just to end, how would you like to see the Dutch film industry move forward in terms of how it creates films?
Are you looking forward to Slag om de Spelde? That's the big question.
I have to say that I was so surprised when I saw the trailer how much you can do nowadays with like 14 million.
Yeah.
Still, that's a pretty large budget, but I thought it was still going to look very cringy, and I thought it looked quite convincing. Just the big budgetness of it. I don't think it's going to do anything interesting again. Like, I think it's just, I'm not really looking forward to it in that regard, but I was very, very surprised in a good way at how it didn't look cheap, even though they definitely tried to make a movie that should have cost like 4 times than it did.
And moving forward,
mm-hmm.
What do you hope to see or add or change?
Well, I would really want to make my movie.
It's just, that's the biggest
addition. When I went to Film Academy, and most filmmakers I know, they're all like really, really bored with the Second World War. Like nobody cares because they all think that when you make a Second World War movie, they already know the font you're going to use. You just want to make another one of those films. Most of my fellow students didn't really care about history that much too, but I do hope that it maybe it can like rekindle some interest into Second World War, because I do think it's endlessly interesting, and we have so many more stories to tell in the Netherlands, and we always end up spending a few million euros every year telling the same story again.
Well, I think this is a great place to end it. And I just want to say thank you, Kim, for coming with this. It's quite a unique take to come on a podcast about celebrating cinema.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Our film choice for the film club for our next episode is the WWII Chungking Express. We're not going to say too much. We're going to go all with the mysteriousness of it all, but be excited. Otherwise, Thank you very much for listening. You can always contact us or email in any stories or questions at celebratingcinema@lab111.nl. Till next time.